Hello and welcome. Thanks for stopping by. My name is Marianne. In today's video, I have two cards featuring an inset frame technique. I first saw this on the Simon Says Stamped YouTube channel by Nicole Spohr, so I'll go ahead and link that for some additional inspiration. But I liked this card design so much that I decided to make a second one. So let's get into it. First, you'll want a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 cardstock panel, and you'll need two sizes of some shape. It could be any shape. In this case, I'm using an arch die, and you'll actually want the bigger die for the first panel. So this is the top panel of your card. And you want to die cut this out of the cardstock. You can save the shape and use it for something else. We're going to be using the sort of negative space. Then you'll need another cardstock panel that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You'll line that up with your first panel, and then you're going to grab the smaller of the two shaped dies and line it up sort of in the middle of the previously cut arch. In this case, I'm using Mirror Rose Gold cardstock. That is so shiny that you can practically see your reflection in it. You can definitely see my camera. But we'll go ahead and die cut this out of this cardstock. And if you layer them up, you'll see that there's a little border of pink within the larger blue. So that forms the inset design of the frame. I'm going to go ahead and cut off some of the edging so that I can use this cardstock for a different project since it's such nice cardstock. I don't want it to go to waste. And you don't actually need it because it won't be seen on the card. You'll only see sort of the inside part. So just cutting this off and then saving those pieces for another project. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add some liquid adhesive to the back of our first panel, just along the edge of that die cut. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of glue, but the liquid adhesive allows you to have some time to finagle the other cardstock into place. And I'm going to flip it over just so I have a good sense of exactly how much border is showing. Now the focal point of our card is going to be this orchid layering die set from Altenew. And so I'm cutting out the various pieces from green cardstock for those stems and then a sort of cream color cardstock for the petals. In this particular die cut, I don't actually have the keyhole design one. It's a little bit of an older set. So in order to make sure all of the petals stay together and don't get misused, I'm taking them directly from my die cutting machine and laying them out in a line on my sticky mat. And this has a nice layering guide on the back, so I'm using that to sort of determine which colors and where I want to apply ink, just to give it a little bit of texture and dimension and a little bit of a differentiation so it's just not all one color. So I'm using that guide to sort of decide which pieces I want to ink up which colors. And so it's mostly yellows and a little bit of brown for what I think is probably the stamen or style. I don't really remember much from my high school biology class, but I think those are components of flowers. And yeah, so I'm just adding some ink to sort of differentiate these. I decided to add some orange to make those a little bit higher contrast than some of the yellows. Then I'm going to use this layering guide that's on the back of the packaging to adhere my flowers together. And I'm just going to show one example of adhering them together, mostly because I don't think this is the most interesting part of the video. But just using a little bit of liquid adhesive, joining our petals together, adding the insert name of flower here, and finally the sort of last little bit, using my pick tool to sort of put that in the space. And that is one of our orchid pieces. So now I finished adhering all the rest of them, decided to add some ink blending to the stems to give them a little bit of dimension. I really like to use like a green as well as sort of an aqua color. And moving on to a card base, I have a card base that is the same color of our panel. And in order to make it a little bit contrasting, I'm using this sort of textured burlap stamp and some dark blue ink to add some interesting texture and a different color to the back to sort of add some contrast between that front panel. And I go ahead and stamp this a bunch of times, overlapping, not really, there's no rhyme or reason to it, just trying to create, some clear distinction between that part of the card and the front panel. So as you can see, it looks a little bit different. And now I'm just sort of laying out my flowers, trying to decide what kind of structure, format I want. Off screen, I went ahead and heat embossed in white the Thinking of You sentiment. And now I'm adding the front panel with some foam adhesive directly onto our card base. And then the next step is just to adhere all of the orchid flower pieces and stems to the card. I ended up going with just one stem to keep it a little simpler and less cluttered. And I ended up using only 5 of the 6 flowers, so it can save both that stem and flower for another project. And some of these overlap with the frame and some of them are inside the frame. And so this is our final card. I went ahead and add some gems that are sort of green and blue to the inside just to give it a little sparkle, but I really liked how this turned out. So much so that I decided to make a second card. So in this example, I'm using these hexagon shapes that I'm going to put at sort of an angle, and I'm going to do them out of purple cardstock. So again, we'll start with the bigger of the 2 dies, and that will be the sort of front panel of our card. And then I'm going to line that up with our second cardstock panel, which is going to be in this lighter purple. And I'm going to align the second die inside the previous die, sort of create that frame. I'm going to tape it down and go ahead and run that through my die cutting machine. And I definitely messed up in lining these cardstock panels, so it's a good thing I like to remove some of the background cardstock, which can be used for a different project. And this will make sure that there isn't any overhang of cardstock as well. And I'll go ahead and add glue onto the darker cardstock background just along the edge of that die cut. And I'm using liquid adhesive here to make sure that the inside shape is maneuverable to get the right amount of spacing. And I'll go ahead and add the lighter purple cardstock onto the back and then flip it over just to make sure and maneuver it into place to make sure it's all even spacing around, or as much as possible. And then I went ahead and die cut some layering tulips, also from Altenew, and I'm adding ink blending to the leaves and flowers of the blooms, and I'm just lining them up here on my sticky mat so I can add the ink blending. In this example, I use a variation of a light pink, a light orange, and a light yellow to sort of create a gradient effect on each of these pieces, which I think I turned out really very pretty. And then going to use the layering guide to adhere these different pieces together. And then for the background, I'm going to be using some grit paste through this brick stencil. It's supposed to dry clear, but it didn't dry as translucent as I wanted it, so I added some purple ink blending to darken it up and create a more tone-on-tone effect. Next, I'm adding some foam tape to the back of the card panel and adhering that directly onto the card base. And here I'm just playing around with the different layouts. I have some heat foiled sentiments, and now I'm gluing all of the pieces of our different flowers. And I really love the way the sort of those tones contrast with the really dark. It turned out really well. And here is our final card. I decided not to add any additional embellishments here because I think the foil really brings that sparkle and that shine, but I also love the way this card turned out. Thanks for watching. I hope you found these cards inspirational and go and make your own inset frame cards. If you have some time, check out some of my other card making videos. Thanks for watching.